The radar screen flickered once, then went black. Major Kestrel Phoenix, Vega stared at the dead display, her hands steady on the controls of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, even as ice crystals began forming on her canopy at 30,000 feet. Below her, somewhere in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, 12 Marines were pinned down by Taliban forces, their radio calls growing weaker by the minute. "Phoenix, this is Tower. We've lost your signature. Abort mission and return to base immediately." The voice crackled through her headset, distant and tinny against the roar of her twin turbofans. She didn't respond, couldn't respond, not when she knew what abandoning this mission meant. 3 hours earlier, the briefing room had erupted in barely concealed snickers when General Morrison announced that Phoenix would be leading the rescue operation. Captain Rodriguez had actually laughed out loud. "Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't we send someone with more experience in actual combat situations?" The general's weathered face had remained impassive. "Major Vega has logged more flight hours in the A-10 than anyone in this squadron. The mission parameters require precision, not bravado." But Phoenix had seen the doubt in their eyes, the same doubt that had followed her through flight school, through her first deployment, through every promotion she'd earned. The doubt that whispered she was there to fill quotas, not to fill cockpits. Now, flying blind through a mountain pass with nothing but her instruments and instinct, that doubt felt like a living thing in the cockpit with her. The A-10's titanium bathtub, the armored shell that protected the pilot, suddenly felt less like protection and more like a coffin. "Broken Arrow 7, this is Phoenix." Her voice cut through the static. "I'm 5 minutes out from your position. Talk to me." The response was immediate, desperate. "Phoenix, we've got wounded. 3 KIA, 4 critical. They've got us locked down in a drainage ditch about 2 clicks north of the LZ. We can see the smoke from here, but we can't move." Phoenix adjusted her approach, diving lower despite the mountain peaks that rose like jagged teeth around her. The A-10 wasn't built for speed or grace. It was built to kill tanks and save lives in that order. Its massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel monster that fired depleted uranium rounds, was mounted beneath the fuselage like the stinger of some mechanical wasp. She'd trained for this moment her entire career. Every simulation, every training flight, every sleepless night studying tactical manuals had led to this. 12 men who needed her to be more than the sum of their doubts. The mountains rose ahead, shrouded in clouds that promised death to the unwary. Phoenix pushed the throttles forward and disappeared into the gray. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reaper Kane stood in the control tower, watching the storm clouds gather over the Hindu Kush. Beside him, the radio operator's face had gone pale. "Sir, we've completely lost contact with Phoenix. Last known position was grid reference 41RQQ12345678. Kane nodded slowly, his jaw working. 23 years in the Air Force had taught him to read weather patterns like scripture, and what he saw building over those mountains made his chest tight. The storm system was massive, a rotating wall of ice and lightning that could tear apart an aircraft twice the size of an A-10. "How long since last contact?" 14 minutes, sir." 14 minutes was a lifetime in combat aviation. Planes didn't go silent for 14 minutes and come back with good news. Kane had opposed Phoenix's assignment to this mission from the beginning. Not because he doubted her skills. Her flight records were impeccable, her gunnery scores consistently in the top 5%. But because he'd seen too many good pilots die in those mountains, their wreckage scattered across peaks that didn't care about training or talent or the best of intentions. The door burst open behind them. Captain Rodriguez strode in, still pulling on his flight suit. "Sir, I'm requesting immediate authorization to launch a search and rescue operation. I can have my bird in the air in 15 minutes. "Negative." Kane's voice was flat, final. "I'm not sending another pilot into that storm." "But sir, if Phoenix is down..." If Phoenix is down, she's dead. The words came out harsher than Kane intended. He turned back to the window, watching the lightning flicker inside the clouds like trapped spirits. And I'm not adding your name to the casualty report. Rodriguez started to argue, but the radio operator held up his hand. Static filled the room, punctuated by a voice so faint it might have been imagination. "Tower, this is Phoenix." The voice faded, swallowed by interference. Kane leaned over the radio operator's shoulder. "Can you boost the signal?" "I'm trying, sir, but the atmospheric disturbance is massive. Whatever's generating that interference is bigger than anything I've seen." They waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Outside, the storm moved closer, its shadow falling across the base like a funeral shroud. Kane found himself thinking about Phoenix's file, about the young woman who'd arrived at the base 6 months ago with more determination than swagger. She'd never been the loudest voice in the briefing room, never been the first to volunteer for the glory missions. But she'd been there every morning before dawn, running maintenance checks on her aircraft, studying weather patterns, practicing approaches until her movements became muscle memory. The radio crackled again. "Tower, this is Phoenix. I have visual on Broken Arrow 7, beginning attack run." Kane grabbed the microphone. "Phoenix, what's your situation? We lost you for 15 minutes. "Radio malfunction, sir. Had to fly blind through the pass, but I'm on target now. Broken Arrow 7, I see your position. Danger close, acknowledge." The Marine ground controller's voice came through clear and desperate. "Danger close confirmed, Phoenix. We're taking heavy fire from the North Ridge. They've got us pinned behind 2 burned-out vehicles." Kane watched the radar screen, hopping for a return signal that never came. Flying without radar in those mountains was like performing surgery blindfolded. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and Phoenix would become another memorial plaque in the squadron-ready room. But as he listened to her voice, calm and professional despite the impossible circumstances, Kane felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the uncertain pilot who'd reported for duty 6 months ago. This was a warrior, forged by doubt and tempered by necessity. The A-10's cannon spoke with the voice of thunder. Phoenix rolled inverted at 2,000 feet, the world spinning around her as she lined up for her attack run. Through the storm-darkened sky, she could see the Taliban positions clearly now. A series of caves and fortified positions carved into the mountainside, muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars. Her first strafing run sent a stream of 30 shells into the ridge, each depleted uranium round punching through rock and steel with devastating efficiency. The GAU-8's distinctive sound, a deep, tearing roar that sounded like the world being ripped in half, echoed off the mountains. "Good hits, good hits." The Marine spotter's voice carried new hope. "Phoenix, you've suppressed the northern position. We're taking movement from the caves at 270 degrees." Phoenix pulled up, banking hard to the left as tracer rounds streaked past her canopy. The A-10 might have been built like a tank, but it wasn't invincible. She could feel the aircraft shudder as small arms fire peppered the armored hull, the distinctive ping of bullets striking titanium. She trained for this moment at Nellis Air Force Base, flying against simulated SAM sites and practicing close air support missions until the procedures became second nature. But training couldn't replicate the weight of real lives hanging in the balance, the knowledge that 12 Marines were counting on her accuracy to survive the next 5 minutes. "Phoenix, be advised, we're seeing movement on the southern ridge as well. Looks like they're trying to flank our position." Phoenix rolled into her second attack run, diving toward the mountainside at an angle that would have terrified most pilots. The A-10's massive engines screamed as she pushed the aircraft past its recommended dive parameters, but she needed the altitude to line up her shots properly. The cannon roared again, walking a line of destruction across the Taliban positions. Cave entrances collapsed in showers of stone and dust. Secondary explosions bloomed orange against the gray mountainside as ammunition stores detonated. But return fire was intensifying. Phoenix felt the aircraft buck as something larger than small arms fire found its mark. Warning lights began flashing on her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, engine temperature climbing. "Phoenix, you're smoking." The Marine spotter's voice carried new urgency. "Phoenix, your left engine is streaming smoke." She looked back over her shoulder, seeing the dark trail streaming behind her aircraft. The A-10 could fly on one engine if necessary, but not at altitude, not in these conditions. She had minutes, maybe less, before she'd have to find somewhere to put down. Broken Arrow 7, I need immediate assessment of your tactical situation. Can you move? Negative, Phoenix. We've still got active shooters in the southern caves. We're combat ineffective until those positions are neutralized. Phoenix banked around for another run, ignoring the growing list of warning indicators. The Marines needed her. Everything else was secondary. The storm followed Phoenix down the mountainside like a living thing, lightning crackling around her wings as she set up for what might be her final attack run. The left engine was running rough now, power fluctuating with each heartbeat of damaged machinery. Through her headset, she could hear the tension in the voices of the ground controllers, the barely controlled panic of men who knew they were asking her to die for them. "Phoenix, you need to break off," came Kane's voice from the tower. "Your aircraft is compromised. RTB immediately." She ignored him, focusing instead on the target acquisition system. The southern caves were partially collapsed from her previous runs, but muzzle flashes still winked from the shadows. Somewhere in those rocky crevices, Taliban fighters were regrouping for one final assault on the trapped Marines. Broken Arrow 7, I'm coming in hot on the southern position. Heads down. Roger, Phoenix, we're as low as we can get. She dove toward the mountainside, the A-10's nose pointed at a cluster of cave mouths like the blade of a guided missile. At the last possible second, she pulled the trigger, sending a concentrated burst of 30 fire into the rocky face. The impact was devastating. Entire sections of the cliff face sheared away, burying the Taliban positions under tons of stone. But the effort cost her. Warning alarms screamed through the cockpit as the left engine finally seized, turbine blades disintegrating in a shower of sparks and smoke. The A-10 lurched to the left, fighting her control inputs as asymmetric thrust tried to flip the aircraft into an unrecoverable spin. "Phoenix is hit, Phoenix is hit," the spotter's voice cracked with stress. "Your left engine just exploded." Phoenix fought the controls, muscle memory taking over as training kicked in. Single-engine approach, emergency procedures, find a suitable landing zone. But looking at the terrain below, she realized with crystal clarity that there was nowhere to land. The mountains were too steep, too rocky, too unforgiving. She had two choices: punch out and hope the Marines could hold position until another rescue could be mounted, or stay with the aircraft and try to clear the remaining Taliban positions. The first choice meant she lived. The second meant the Marines might. Broken Arrow 7, what's your situation? The reply was immediate, honest, devastating. "Phoenix, they're massing for a final assault. Whatever you just did bought us maybe 10 minutes. Without air support, we're not making it out of here." 10 minutes. Phoenix looked at her fuel gauge, her engine temperature readings, the growing list of system failures cascading across her displays. The A-10 had maybe one more attack run left in her before physics and engineering made the decision for both of them. She'd spent her entire career fighting to prove herself worthy of this moment. Now that it was here, there was no doubt left, only duty. Broken Arrow 7, I'm coming around for one more pass. Make it count. The radio crackled with Kane's voice, urgent now. "Phoenix, negative. Your aircraft is non-mission capable. Eject immediately." But Phoenix had already rolled into her final dive, chasing death down the mountainside at 400 knots. The mountainside rushed up to meet her like an avalanche in reverse. Through the shattered remains of her left engine, Phoenix could see individual rocks, scraggly trees clinging to impossible precipices, the dark mouths of caves where desperate men waited with rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Her targeting system was failing, electrical problems cascading through the A-10 systems like a virus. She switched to manual gunnery, lining up the shot by instinct and experience, feeling the aircraft's behavior through her hands and feet rather than trusting the damaged instruments. The GAU-8 cannon had perhaps 50 rounds left, not enough for a sustained barrage, but enough for one final, decisive statement. "Phoenix, break off. That's a direct order." Kane's voice cut through the static, but it might as well have been coming from another planet. She could see them now, Taliban fighters emerging from concealed positions, setting up a heavy machine gun on a rocky outcrop that would command the Marines' entire position. In 30 seconds, they'd have the angle they needed to end the siege permanently. Phoenix pulled the trigger and held it down. The cannon's roar was different this time, deeper, more final. Depleted uranium rounds tore through rock and flesh with equal efficiency, collapsing the entire section of mountainside in a controlled avalanche. The machine gun position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. Secondary explosions rippled across the cliff face as hidden ammunition stores cooked off. But the recoil from the cannon's final burst pushed the damaged A-10 past its limits. The aircraft shuddered, rolled left, and began an uncontrolled descent toward the valley floor. "Phoenix, eject now." She reached for the ejection handle, her hand freezing inches from the bright red lever. Below her, she could see the Marines beginning to move, using the cover of the dust cloud to advance toward the landing zone. They were going to make it, but only if she could buy them a few more minutes. The A-10 hit the mountainside at 200 knots, the impact sending a shockwave through the valley that could be felt for miles. The fireball rose 300 feet into the storm-darkened sky, a pillar of flame and smoke that marked the end of Phoenix's war. But in the silence that followed, there was no enemy fire. The mountains finally were quiet. 2 weeks later, the squadron gathered in the briefing room where Phoenix's mission had begun. The same faces were there: Rodriguez, Kane, the ground controllers who had guided her through her final flight. But the atmosphere was different now, heavy with something that hadn't been there before. Kane stood at the front of the room, a folded flag in his hands, and a stack of after-action reports on the desk behind him. The official inquiry had been swift and thorough. Major Kestrel Vega had died in the line of duty, her actions resulting in the successful extraction of 12 Marines from hostile territory. "The preliminary investigation is complete," Kane began, his voice carefully neutral. "Major Vega's aircraft suffered catastrophic engine failure due to enemy action. Despite having the opportunity to safely eject, she chose to continue the mission, ultimately sacrificing her life to ensure the survival of the ground team." Rodriguez shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the weight of his own memories. He'd been the one pushing for a different pilot, the one who'd questioned Phoenix's readiness for combat operations. Now those words felt like stones in his throat. "The Marines she saved have submitted testimony regarding her actions during the engagement," Kane continued. "According to their statements, Major Vega made multiple attack runs under heavy fire, neutralizing entrenched enemy positions that had pinned down the ground team for over 4 hours. Her final attack run eliminated the remaining Taliban positions, allowing for successful extraction." Kane paused, looking around the room at faces that had learned hard truths about judgment and courage. "Effective immediately, this squadron will be redesignated as the Phoenix Squadron in honor of Major Vega's sacrifice. Her call sign will be retired permanently." The briefing room fell silent. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines provided a constant reminder of the mission that continued, the war that waited for no one's grief. But inside that room, surrounded by the instruments of war and the men who wielded them, something had changed forever. They had learned the difference between confidence and competence, between swagger and courage. They had learned it from a woman they'd underestimated, who had paid the ultimate price to teach them. Captain Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, request permission to speak." Kane nodded. "I'd like to volunteer for the next combat mission. Whatever it is, wherever it is, I think I have something to prove." Kane looked at the captain for a long moment, seeing something in the younger man's eyes that hadn't been there before. "Request approved, Captain, but you're not proving anything to us. You're proving it to yourself." The meeting dispersed quietly, pilots returning to their aircraft and their duties. But Phoenix's legacy remained, woven into the squadron's identity like a thread of titanium through silk. General Morrison arrived at the base 3 days after the memorial service, his staff car kicking up dust as it pulled to a stop outside the squadron headquarters. He'd flown in from Peterson Air Force Base specifically for this visit, carrying with him a small wooden box and the weight of a decision that had taken him 24 hours to make. Kane met him at the door, saluting with the precision that had carried him through 2 decades of service. "General, we weren't expecting you." Morrison returned the salute, then gestured toward the squadron building. "Walk with me, Colonel. We need to talk." They walked past the flight line, where A-10s sat in their revetments like sleeping predators. Morrison stopped beside Phoenix's former aircraft, now draped with a tarp and marked for salvage evaluation. Her personal effects had been removed, but the crew chief had left her helmet on the seat, a small act of remembrance that spoke louder than official ceremonies. "Tell me about Major Vega," Morrison said quietly. Kane chose his words carefully. She was professional, competent, dedicated. Her flight hours were among the highest in the squadron, her gunnery scores consistently excellent. "That's her service record, Colonel. I can read that in any personnel file. I'm asking what you thought of her." Kane looked at the shrouded aircraft, remembering Phoenix as she'd been in life. Quiet, determined, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself to the world. "Honestly, sir, I underestimated her. We all did." Kane's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. She never tried to be the loudest voice in the briefing room or the first to volunteer for the high-profile missions. She just did her job, every day, better than most and without complaint. When the test came, she was ready in ways the rest of us weren't. Morrison nodded slowly. "The Marines she saved have been in contact with my office. Sergeant Martinez, the team leader, wants to name his daughter after her. Says Phoenix gave his little girl a chance to meet her father." The general opened the wooden box he'd been carrying, revealing a collection of medals and ribbons that represented the highest honors the Air Force could bestow. "The President has approved the Medal of Honor for Major Vega. It will be presented to her family at a ceremony next month." Kane felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "She earned it, sir." "She earned more than that, Colonel. She earned our respect, our remembrance, and our commitment to do better." Morrison closed the box, his weathered hand steady despite the emotion in his voice. "That young woman understood something that took me 30 years in the service to learn. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to act despite that fear, to put others before yourself when everything inside you is screaming to run." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 career officers contemplating the mysteries of leadership and sacrifice. Around them, the base hummed with activity, pilots preparing for missions, maintainers servicing aircraft, the eternal rhythm of military life that continued regardless of individual loss. "There's something else, Colonel," Morrison said finally. "I want you to establish a training program in Major Vega's name, something that teaches our pilots not just how to fly and fight, but how to lead, how to earn the trust of the people they're sworn to protect." Kane nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll have a proposal on your desk within the week." As Morrison's staff car disappeared into the distance, Kane remained beside Phoenix's aircraft, thinking about second chances and hard lessons learned too late. 6 months after Phoenix's death, the Vega Leadership Academy graduated its first class of pilots. The curriculum was unlike anything the Air Force had attempted before, equal parts tactical training and leadership development, designed to produce not just competent aviators but officers who understood the human cost of their decisions. Captain Rodriguez stood before the graduating class, his new instructor's wings gleaming on his uniform. He'd volunteered for the assignment despite offers of more prestigious positions, feeling called to pass on lessons he'd learned at the cost of a colleague's life. "Today, you'll receive your wings and your assignments," he told the assembled pilots. "You'll go out into the world as representatives of the United States Air Force, carrying with you the skills and knowledge you've acquired during your training. But before you go, I want to tell you about someone who understood what it truly means to serve." The story he told was different each time, but the core remained constant. A young woman who'd faced doubt with determination, who'd proven her worth not through grand gestures but through quiet competence, who'd given her life to save others without hesitation or regret. In the back of the room, a framed photograph watched over the proceedings. Phoenix in her flight suit, standing beside her A-10, her expression serious but confident. Her eyes seemed to follow each graduating pilot as they crossed the stage, as if she were personally commissioning each one into the brotherhood and sisterhood of military aviation. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the class honor graduate, paused before the photograph after receiving her assignment to an A-10 squadron in Afghanistan. "I won't let you down," she whispered to the image. The photograph, of course, offered no reply, but in the silence that followed, Chen felt something settle in her chest, not pressure but purpose. A sense that she was part of something larger than herself, connected to every pilot who had come before and would come after. Rodriguez watched the exchange from across the room, remembering his own moment of recognition months earlier. Phoenix's legacy wasn't just in the Marines she'd saved or the squadron that bore her name. It was in every pilot who chose service over self, who understood that true strength came not from being underestimated, but from exceeding every expectation placed upon them. The ceremony ended with the traditional toast, to absent comrades to the mission, to the uncertain future that awaited them all. But as the pilots filed out into the afternoon sun, each carrying their wings and their assignments and their hopes for the future, Phoenix's presence lingered. She had become more than memory, more than inspiration. She had become proof that heroism wasn't born in moments of crisis, but forged in long years of preparation, in the daily choice to be better than yesterday, in the willingness to stand up when others sat down. The sky called to them all, vast and unforgiving and full of promise. And in that sky, Phoenix's spirit soared eternal, a guardian angel for every pilot who followed in her contrails. 1 year after the incident in the Hindu Kush, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force stood before a memorial wall in Camp Leatherneck, running her fingers across a name etched in black granite. Major Kestrel, Phoenix, Vega, United States Air Force. Santos had been part of Broken Arrow 7, pinned down in that drainage ditch while Taliban fighters closed in from all sides. She remembered the sound of Phoenix's A-10 diving through the storm, the thunder of the GAU-8 cannon that had meant the difference between life and death. "You saved my life," she said quietly to the stone, "all our lives." Behind her, other Marines gathered for the daily memorial service, their faces bearing the marks of a war that continued despite individual losses. Some had known Phoenix personally, others knew her only through story and legend, but all understood the debt they owed to the pilot who had chosen their lives over her own. The memorial service was brief, military in its precision and efficiency. Names were read, prayers offered, honors rendered. But when the formal ceremony ended, the Marines remained, each drawn to pay personal respects to the woman who had died so they could stand there. Sergeant Martinez approached the wall, his young daughter sleeping in his arms. True to his word, he had named her Phoenix, and every night he told her stories about the guardian angel who watched over Marines from the sky. "She's beautiful," Santos said, nodding toward the sleeping child. Martinez smiled, fatigue and pride warring in his expression. "She's strong like her namesake. Doesn't cry much, doesn't complain. Just watches everything with these serious eyes like she's trying to figure out the world." Sounds familiar. They stood together in comfortable silence, two warriors bonded by shared experience and mutual loss. Around them, the business of war continued, helicopters lifting off, supply convoys departing, the endless cycle of deployment and return that defined military life. But in that moment, beside that memorial wall, time seemed suspended. Phoenix's sacrifice had created ripples that spread far beyond her squadron, her service, even her war. She had become a symbol of something larger, the idea that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary circumstances, that duty and honor were more than words carved in stone. Lieutenant Chen, now flying combat missions out of Bagram Airfield, landed her A-10 after a successful close air support mission, her aircraft scarred but intact. As she performed her post-flight inspection, she found herself thinking about Phoenix's final mission, about the choice between self-preservation and service that every combat pilot faced. The Afghan sky stretched above her, vast and indifferent. But Chen no longer felt small beneath its immensity. She felt connected to her aircraft, her mission, her brothers and sisters in arms, and to the spirit of a woman who had shown them all what it meant to fly not for glory but for others. "Phoenix lead good hunting today." Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Thompson, approached with the maintenance log. Chen signed off on the aircraft, noting minor battle damage that would require overnight repair. "Thanks, Sergeant. She flew true." Thompson nodded toward the nose of the A-10, where a small memorial decal bore Phoenix's call sign and the dates of her service. "They always do, ma'am. It's in their nature." As Chen walked toward the debriefing room, she passed a group of new pilots fresh from training, their eyes wide with the mixture of excitement and apprehension that marked all combat rookies. She remembered that feeling, the weight of responsibility settling on young shoulders like armor. "Ma'am," one of the new pilots, a young man barely out of flight school, approached hesitantly. "Are the stories true about Major Vega?" Chen paused, considering her answer. How do you explain heroism to someone who hasn't yet been tested? How do you convey the weight of decisions that can't be undone? "The stories are true," she said finally, "but they're not the whole truth. Phoenix wasn't special because she died for others. She was special because she lived for others every day in ways both small and large. The final mission was just the culmination of a lifetime of choosing service over self." The young pilot nodded solemnly, filing the information away with all the other lessons he was learning about combat and leadership and the price of freedom. Chen continued toward her debriefing, but her thoughts remained with Phoenix and the legacy that continued to unfold. In training academies and combat zones, in memorial services and quiet moments of reflection, Phoenix's story was being retold, reshaped, and passed down to new generations of warriors. Death, it seemed, was not the end of influence but the beginning of immortality. 5 years later, the Phoenix Squadron had become legendary throughout the Air Force. Their combat record was unmatched, their reputation for precision and courage unquestioned. But more than their tactical achievements, they were known for their culture, a brotherhood and sisterhood forged by Phoenix's example and maintained by her memory. Colonel Kane, now the wing commander, stood in his office reviewing assignment requests from pilots across the Air Force. Everyone wanted to fly with Phoenix Squadron, drawn by the promise of serving in a unit that represented the best of military aviation. But Kane was selective in his approvals, looking not just for technical skill but for character traits that would honor Phoenix's memory. He wanted pilots who understood that individual excellence meant nothing without collective purpose, that true strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, now the squadron commander, knocked on Kane's door. "Sir, we have a problem." Kane looked up from the assignment requests. "What kind of problem?" "The good kind. We have more qualified applicants than we can accommodate, and they're all citing the same reason for wanting to transfer. They want to serve in Phoenix Squadron." Kane smiled. "That's the kind of problem I can live with. What's your recommendation?" Rodriguez sat down, his expression thoughtful. "I think we need to expand our mission. Instead of just accepting transfer requests, maybe we should start a rotation program. Bring pilots in for 6-month assignments, let them experience our culture, then send them back to their home units as ambassadors." It was a radical idea, but Kane could see the merit. Phoenix's influence would spread through the Air Force like wildfire, carried by pilots who had learned her lessons and embraced her values. "Do it," Kane said, "but maintain our standards. Anyone who comes through this program needs to understand that they're not just learning tactics, they're becoming guardians of a legacy." The program launched 6 months later with 12 pilots from various Air Force units. They came expecting advanced combat training and received something more valuable: a masterclass in leadership, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Each pilot who completed the rotation returned to their home unit changed, carrying with them not just improved skills but a new understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. They told Phoenix's story in ready rooms and briefing halls, in training exercises and combat missions, spreading her influence like seeds on fertile ground. Captain Jessica "Hawk" Williams, a fighter pilot from the 55th Fighter Squadron, returned from her rotation with Phoenix Squadron and immediately implemented new training protocols focused on close air support and precision engagement. Her commanding officer noticed the change immediately. "You're different, Captain, more focused, more purposeful." Williams nodded. "I learned what I was really flying for, sir. Not just mission success, but the people on the ground who depend on us. Every sortie, every training flight, every decision has human consequences." The transformation wasn't limited to individual pilots. Entire squadrons began adopting Phoenix Squadron's training methods, their emphasis on precision over glory, their culture of mutual support and continuous improvement. The ripple effects spread throughout the Air Force, creating a new generation of leaders who understood that true heroism wasn't found in headlines, but in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Years passed, and Phoenix's story evolved from recent history to enduring legend. New pilots learned about her in flight school, read about her tactics in training manuals, studied her final mission as an example of courage under fire. But for those who had known her, who had served with her, she remained more than symbol or inspiration. She remained family. 10 years after Phoenix's sacrifice, the Marine Corps dedicated a new close air support training facility at Camp Pendleton, naming it the Vega Center for Joint Operations. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of attendees: Marines, pilots, family members, and friends who had been touched by Phoenix's story. Sergeant Martinez, now a gunnery sergeant with his own Marines to lead, stood at the podium with his daughter Phoenix beside him. She was 10 years old now, bright and serious, with her father's eyes and her namesake's quiet intensity. "My daughter asks me sometimes why I named her after someone she never met," Martinez began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "I tell her that some people touch our lives so deeply that their influence becomes part of who we are. Major Vega saved more than our lives that day in Afghanistan. She saved our futures, our families, our chance to make a difference in the world." Young Phoenix Martinez listened intently, her hand in her father's as he spoke about courage and sacrifice, and the debt they all owed to a woman who had chosen duty over safety. She's part of all of us now, Martinez continued. In every mission we fly, every Marine we train, every decision we make about what kind of people we want to be. Her sacrifice wasn't just about saving 12 Marines in a drainage ditch. It was about showing us what we could become if we had the courage to try. The ceremony concluded with a flyover by Phoenix Squadron, 12 A-10s in precise formation, their contrails sketching Phoenix's call sign across the California sky. As the sound of their engines faded, young Phoenix Martinez looked up at her father with questions in her eyes. "Will I be brave like her someday, Dad?" Martinez knelt beside his daughter, seeing in her face the same determination that had marked her namesake. "You already are, sweetheart. Every day you choose to be kind instead of cruel, to help instead of hurt, to build instead of tear down. That's courage. That's what Major Vega would have wanted for you." The crowd dispersed slowly, each person carrying away their own piece of Phoenix's legacy. But the real memorial wasn't in buildings or ceremonies or formal dedications. It was in the lives changed, the missions flown, the quiet acts of heroism that happened every day because one woman had shown them the way. In ready rooms and briefing halls, in training flights and combat missions, Phoenix's spirit lived on. She had become more than memory, more than inspiration. She had become a standard to aspire to, a reminder that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they had the courage to try. The sky called to new generations of pilots, vast and challenging and full of promise. And in that sky, Phoenix's legacy soared eternal, a guardian angel for all who chose service over self, duty over safety, others over themselves. Her story was their story now, written in contrails across an endless blue, a testament to the truth that heroes are not born but made, one choice at a time, one mission at a time, one life at a time. The legend of Phoenix would endure as long as there.